Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akio, and if you're interested in effective software development teams, this episode is for you. We talk about restructures in big organizations and how to form teams that actually make sense from a product and tech perspective. Joining me today is André Borgonovo, engineering manager over at GoodHabitz, friend of the show and returning guest from over 3.5 years ago. So it's been a while. Enjoy the episode. Like recently I had a refinement, I think it was about a week and a half ago, where very early on, beginning of last year, a decision was made that the new team formed, they got kind of this product and a lot of people left and a lot of people newly onboarded. So they had opinions of what they kind of were responsible for nowadays. And decisions were made. Some logic of the front end was removed to the back end. And now we were more back end driven with regards to data and also validity of data and kind of API design. Mm-hmm. And those changes now have impact still. It's kind of this ripple effect where new features that we pick up now, someone said they're actually more back-end heavy. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people in the team that kind of owned the back-end and were responsible for that also left. So now we have this kind of, I wouldn't say void because we still deliver and fulfill. But then the question was, okay, since we now have a lot of capacity nowadays on the front end, do we make the change and do we do more logic on the front end or do we stick with that decision?
Yes. Yeah.
And now I'm doing product management. Like in the end, it's not my decision. I think it's very interesting. And I think we should uphold kind of the decision that we made. And also people from the front end are kind of dabbing their feet in back-end development. So we're moving to more full stack, which I fully support. And if people have that ambition, then obviously we have the room to do so. So that's amazing. But I wonder,
it's so funny how these resonate so much with different experiences I had as well, right? So you were talking about a very common pattern, I think, in companies, right? When you have different competencies within the company, like more front enders than back end, the software starts to evolve towards a certain direction where indeed, if there's no deliberate decision about it, the logic or the business rules start to show up in the front end as well, unless the team really upholds their own principles and finds a way to get the best use of the people that are in the team, right? Because of course, everybody wants to feel motivated and with their purpose to deliver good things for the job that they are doing. So you still want to do to use the time people have to bring value to the business. And what's the best way to do that considering the constraints, right? So having more front-enders, the back-enders, and upholding to certain principles like having dumb front end, keeping all the business logic in the back end. That's a pattern I've seen before, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, but I wonder if that's then okay, right? Because the team structure and your team setup, the capabilities, sometimes, and I fully agree with you, they can define what software you have basically on a technical level, where what logic gets implemented. But then teams change. Like I would love if a team can be the same team for a really long time. I think that's super good with regards to delivery, predictability, resilience, ownership, and autonomy. But that's just not reality. Like people switch in and out. And then if too many people switch in and out, does your architecture need to change for that new team setup? Or are they going to kind of uphold the conventions of a previous team and continue?
Yeah,
I don't know the trade-offs there.
Yeah.
I would love to see both scenarios play out, but that's just not possible.
Yeah. That's the Conway's law being applied in practice, right? So my own perspective in that is we need to keep a general picture of the architecture that we intend, right? We know what business and capabilities we want to offer to our user and customers. And the team changes are indeed more fluid, right? Depending on competencies that you have, people that are coming in and leaving the company. So this is a much more fluid space, right? So when you're thinking of software architecture, in my point of view, and that's what I learned as well in my different experiences, is you should focus on the architecture and the components you have in the application and really assign components to teams rather than defining components based on the teams, right? So a patterns that I have seen before, which I consider a little bit of anti-patterns, is when you start addressing aspects of your application, like namespaces and things like that, based on your team's name, you're likely just, opening a door for future failure anyway, because these teams are things that the company, and being an agile company, actually it's healthy that they will continue to change these teams, depending on the growth of the company and the needs that the company have. But when you attach that directly into the software level in terms of namespaces, in the way you structure the software itself, you get into this big risk of this not being a future-proof definition, right? When it comes to team stability, I agree with you. You should have teams that are at least for 1 year, 2 years stable, and being capable to respond to these changes of the company, of the market sometimes is necessary, right? So you need to have this flexibility. Once you design your teams based on the architecture that you aim at, I think you can uphold to that, right? So you're thinking of like, these are the features that I offer with my software. This is the roadmap I have for the next year. And of course, that's not always 100%, right? Road mapping is a bit of trying to predict the future, and up to a certain point, you can be confident about the roadmap. So if you can define your teams based on a bit of a long-term picture of 1, 2, 3 years maybe, that will give you enough stability to keep that team setup stable, regardless of the small changes of someone leaving the company or someone joining the company. And of course, you need to keep open to the signals again to adapt as you go. But I think it's that's only based if you look a little bit in the long term, which is not common, I think. It's common that companies actually react to the roadmap changes, right? When they need something that they need to deliver and that becomes a project, boom, change everything. Let's set up a team to execute it and let's go. Yeah. So I think it's up for the leadership team to uphold a little bit and say, hey, let's think a little bit mid-long term and think of, okay, we have this roadmap initiative coming in. How do we consider this roadmap initiative, right? Do we want to assign that fully to one of the teams, or do we consider this roadmap initiative that needs to be broken down into different parts of the application that will do different aspects of this roadmap initiative, right? So there's a little bit of thought that needs to go, in my point of view, in the management level, of course, with insights of the tech team for sure, to see how to break down this roadmap initiative to make sure that the architecture remains healthy in the long term, right?
Being now responsible for product and also product roadmap and product development, I think it's very difficult because maybe it's the maturity of the product that I'm responsible for, but looking ahead 1 year is kind of doable. And then already there, if I have a 1 year plan, let's say, and a plan is very much like it's just an ordered list, I already communicate that if we look at it now and probably in the next quarter, things are going to shuffle, things are going to change. We focus on the most important part, KPI deliverables that are like on board level agreed. Those are always on top, most important. And still ordered, and then everything else that is nice to have, the order can shuffle basically. Which means if I have that already in 1 year, and then looking at 2 or 3 years, it's very difficult with regards to like bigger chunks of work that we want to work on. Maybe it's like the autonomy that I have currently in the assignments, also at a bank, so more rigid, more people have their hands in things. But looking at a roadmap and then kind of plotting from a team perspective and looking at what a team needs to fulfill that, I think is very challenging.
100%. I think things will change depending on the size of the company, right? So if we're thinking about a 30 people team, mostly you can keep the overview of like how the software is developed across the board. So you can look at the different teams, how they interact with each other, and you can keep an overview of like the overall roadmap of that's being executed. When you go, to 300, 1,000, 2,000 development teams, then it's a whole different game, right? So keeping an overview and thinking of the teams globally becomes much more challenging. If you manage to find a roadmap that is clear for 1 year, that is one of the signals you should consider for your team formation. So I think it's relevant that you go through some exercises like domain mapping, right? So event storming is a very interesting tool for that, to look into how the user journey within your application happens, right? So there are certain handover moments or milestones that happen in the user journey, which show these interactions where these domains change, right? So a user logs into the application and lands in the homepage of your application. So this moment where the user is authenticated and lands in the homepage is a milestone that you can consider for splitting these different domains on your application, right? So one of the signals definitely is roadmap, but the others should not be the unique point of focus, right? But rather, which are these places where the application can be well isolated in components that can be, again, highly cohesive and loosely coupled, right? So when you're looking at teams and defining how the teams should be structured in a product and engineering environment, you should look at similar principles than software architecture, right? So you want to have teams that can keep the complexity of the domain or the software component they are handling highly cohesive and within their own boundaries, let's say. So you can keep the overall system complexity much lower, right? So you keep the complexity local to the team and what they are doing. And then the communication with other teams is either very clear, with clear interactions, and hopefully through APIs. And APIs that are isolated to the needs that other teams have as well. So the principles there in software architecture and team formation are very similar to each other, right? That's why if you get teams that are developing a software and they keep focusing like only on their internal needs, in the sense of like, hey, I want to create this service and it's going to have a database and it's going to have these layers in the software architecture, you incur the risk of them creating something that works beautifully for them. So you keep it very simple, easy to use, with a clear structure, but it doesn't help in lowering the overall system complexity, right? And what I mean by that is, if you want to lower the overall system complexity, you need to limit the amount of information that you expose to other teams or other systems, right? So you say, if you want to place an order, for example, and then you have this order service, you want to place an order with just the minimum amount of information that you need to provide from the order service. And then that order service takes care of the complexity related to creating the order, maybe payment, maybe other things, which do not need to be known by other teams or other services. So the same principles apply there, where you want to isolate the amount of information other system or services need to know. So you keep the complexity hidden out of them, meaning that you can evolve this complexity by yourself, right? Talking to a project manager and talking to the evolving requirements that service can have. So the principle is the same, right? Bringing the complexity and keeping it isolated, surrounded by a boundary, and keeping the overall system complexity lower in that way, right? So the overall system complexity lowers, the local needs to be a bit more complex naturally, right?
Yeah. I've been in teams where we had that kind of component focus or domain focus. And I've also been in teams where that domain focus is what we aimed for, but in the end, for speed of delivery, we ended up with a technical split. So back-end team, front-end team. And I've also been in teams where you have a Gen AI team that does more data science, different cadence. And I've also, and that was specifically in the current assignment, was where teams were kind of mapped to a stakeholder landscape. And it wasn't necessarily looked at from a domain perspective because the team had kind of overlapping responsibilities. If you have a team that is responsible for new data ingestion and a little bit of visualization, and then a team that is responsible for advanced visualizations, both teams have their own stakeholder landscape. But if you have a new data stream with advanced visualizations, you have to have both teams basically.
Yeah.
So I don't know where kind of the nuances are. And I think in very much context, it depends. In the end, I became responsible for both teams. And I said, this from my surface level, like it just didn't make sense. So then we merged the teams with regards to responsibilities. And then we just said, this team does two stakeholder landscapes, basically. And then it's up to product to manage expectations, manage milestones, manage delivery. And I learned a lot from there, to a point where I basically said full focus in first half for this part of the organization, and then second half kind of that part. And this part wasn't happy with that because that means kind of 1 or 2 quarters no delivery basically. But from a team perspective and ownership, that really helped because first of all, the team was new, as much knowledge sharing as possible with regards to the whole domain, like end-to-end user journeys, instead of you're part of like 40% and then this team is like part of 60%. So I really like that. But then when it comes to kind of previous experience that I've had as well, when it came to speed of delivery and people being autonomous with regards to also capabilities and KPIs that were kind of, timeline-wise hard to manage, that's why we then split up on a technical level. We can make decisions faster in isolation rather than having the whole team, let's say the wider team in the same room, to discuss specific technical topics. So I still don't know what the best way forward is. And in the end, we would say, especially with that technical split, back then we recognized it might not be ideal and we can go into more domain layers later on. But we never did that because that speed of delivery was kind of, addictive as well.
Yeah, I think you were talking about. It's interesting that your questions and experience go through the topics that I have in mind as well, which are. So we started talking about road mapping, right? Then we did go through how the domain or the functions that the system already have can be isolated, so complexity is local. Then the third topic is definitely stakeholders, right? It doesn't matter that you define the teams in whatever way you think it makes sense for the software architecture. If the stakeholders are not on board with that, right? In a way, you also want to think of the company as a whole system, right? So it's not only product and engineering teams that are fulfilling their product roadmap, let's say, but also you have stakeholders that will influence, right? Either stakeholders. You can call them domain experts or business partners that will be on the business side requesting and asking you support for doing different things, right? So mapping, when you are going through this exercise of thinking how you want to set up teams or what is the most optimal way to do, definitely you should try, in whatever attempts that you try to design the teams, you should try to map them towards the stakeholders. And that's super interesting, right? So you can get situations where for a stakeholder it's not clear to which team they should talk to get something done. So, right, you're thinking from the team perspective, but think a little bit from the stakeholder perspective. Sometimes they are like, hey, I need this done. To whom I talk to, right? Yeah. And then they have 5 teams to choose from. And that becomes also very cumbersome from the stakeholder themselves. So you need to have this mapping and also think exactly what you were pointing out. So if you have 2-3 different stakeholders that are all going and requesting things to the same team, it will definitely put some load in the product manager to align all of them in terms of like which priorities should come first. What I've seen playing out quite interestingly is a few things, right? On the business side, so if you have an internal stakeholder, which is big, for example, a whole department, you could put it like that. What was very interesting in my experience is defining a business partner that is responsible for the voice of that department towards product and engineering, right? So what happens then, it facilitates a lot the conversation of a product manager or product owner talking to this department, collecting priorities, and understanding what are the real needs and what should be in the roadmap for execution. That means that the whole department then, when they have needs and requests for the product engineering team, instead of going to the product manager, they would go to this business partner, have an internal conversation where they filter a little bit and think within their own terms and domain what should be their own priorities, right? So that helps a little bit on organizing the work so things come in a little bit of more sensible manner towards the product manager. I think when you were talking about merging 2 teams that have 2 different stakeholders or keeping them apart, there are many things you have to take into consideration. And I agree with you. When you keep them together, then you have this question of, okay, how do I handle the roadmap, right? Because having one team that is tackling 2 roadmap initiatives at the same time, you end up having 2 teams internally anyway, right? Now the thing is, it really, the best decision that there can only be taken in context, right? So collecting the signals, and especially with the buying of the team, that's the best way. So if during your experience, the idea of merging the 2 teams was the idea that made sense for everybody that was involved, likely the best thing to do at that moment is to merge the 2 teams and keep evolving from there, right? So this agility of being capable of iterating is super important, because then the team can fulfill, okay, we merged, we tried, and one of the outcomes could be, hey, it was amazing to have the whole team working together in the same business initiative. We really could help each other. We felt like everybody was in sync. In the daily meetings, if they have, for example, they are talking about the same topic and can help each other and give quick feedback and review between the things that they are doing. And that could be the outcome, right? They have this feeling of like, okay, it's really working for us. And then the stakeholders would come and say, hey, Yeah, but you can only execute once. And then you need to have that conversation. You say, hey, for the amount of things we have to do, we are with the right size of a team to tackle these things. And if we want to tackle more things, we might need to grow the team. Or you come back to the team and maybe the outcome could be, well, we tried merging in the same team, but it remains that we are just working on different things anyway. So although we tried, I'm not seeing the benefit. I keep saying things in the daily stand-up that no one cares about, or only the other person here cares about, but the rest of the team doesn't. It's not working out for me. So probably you need to think of, okay, what didn't work before? That meant we had two different teams. What's not working now that we have a single team? How you can go into a third mode. And in many ways that might mean, getting two product managers maybe to handle those two teams, or getting more developers on board, or just, and that can be a way, having these kind of sub-teams where you deliberately say, we have one team because X, Y, and Z, and that could be a shared product manager, a shared engineering manager. But we know that these two people are allocated to this focus, and these two people are allocated to that focus. And you find mechanisms to keep this team in sync in the way you think, right? So same thing as software architecture, right? So you're looking at the whole system, and you can break that down into subsystems or domains, and then you can break that down into components, and then you can break that down into classes. So you can have different levels of connection. The thing is, the more low level you go, the more you want to have these items very cohesive, right? So if two people are working on the same thing together as a sub-team, it should be very cohesive. And in one way, they create a certain isolation with the other two guys that might be working on something else. These are options that you can only experiment together with the team, because the best decision there can only be made in context, right? I don't believe there is a certain formula that you can use, but rather signals and aspects that you should consider for sure to move forward with these decisions.
Yeah, the signal of having a stand-up and then listening to what people are working on, and kind of the collaboration and discussions, if people relate to and can help, I think that's incredibly valuable. Because now we're working on, specifically in the current team, an initiative that hits a lot of technical, I think capabilities, maybe capability is not the right term, but like technical sides of ownership. I have data science, I have data engineering, I have back-end and front-end, like the full end-to-end chain. But when those two, or when a few of those are kind of working in isolations, then you do see kind of this split within the team where people are working on their own responsibilities. And then when we have something that is actually end-to integration and delivering that user value that we've been working towards in kind of a bigger milestone, then I see everyone collaborate. So then it's the question of, should these be, a recent question that I had, and I asked myself, should these be like two separate isolated teams where they then come together for the integration work, or is it fine as is? And I don't know the answer yet. I think you can look back into how software have been developed in the past, right? So you can think of a whole engineering department, let's say, and think of I don't know, let's say 30 people, and then you get you could have an infrastructure team, right, that takes care of computing and storage and the cloud environment, for example, where they're concerned about the database. Maybe pipelines, maybe the Kubernetes cluster that they host. And then you get into a backend team that actually develops the APIs and the backend services and stores all the data in the database, maybe maintains the database schema, and then the front-end team. And you could go up to, UX design, UX research teams, and then, of course, the product team taking care of that. So you have a split there on competency-based teams. What are the pros of those teams, right? They can interact very closely with peers that work on exactly the same thing they do. Yeah.
So it's super powerful in that sense of, okay, we can standardize how backend services are done in our company, right? So that's the benefit of it. If you get one person leaving the company, likely the other one already has the knowledge of what they have been working on, because they are going through the same code base. Everything is on their hands, and it's easy in a way to share technical knowledge, standards, and principles. So that's very powerful. That's what I see you describing there. What is the con of that? a lot of handover moments, right? So when you are trying to do a cross discipline kind of initiative that involves front end, back end, and infrastructure, there's so much coordination that you need to do between these different teams, which then you go into the very risky things of doing waterfall projects, right? So you're planning everything up front, and you tell, hey, I need these infrastructure resources, I need these backend services with this API, and I need this kind of front-end UI. And then you go and integrate all that. Likely you do that after you spend, I don't know, maybe weeks or months of development.
Yeah.
You go in integration, and finally that lands in the hands of the customer. What is the risk? The customer sees that and has, lots of feedback to give to them. And that's the risk of waterfall approaches, right? And we know in software development, it is as it is an organic and discipline, you need to have this quick feedback, right? The success of the projects that you execute are often related to how quick you can get feedback from the end users and customers you are serving. So these are the trade-offs that you have to handle, right? So of course, in modern development, what people are doing is like these small teams where you have competencies together, right? So infrastructure, back-end, front-end, and design all together thinking about a vertical of the application. But then internally, you remain with the same challenges, right? So you have people that are focused in the back-end, focused in the front-end. And what I notice is, so thinking a little bit of these other iterations, other ceremonies that can happen if you use Scrum, for example, or other methodologies. You notice that sometimes you should you can consider taking refinement or technical design sessions with just a subgroup of those people, and indeed that will be the most valuable, right? So if you're thinking of like, I want to have a session to design the database or the internals of my service, right? How I'm going to structure the layers of an API. Is it really worth to have the front-end team also collaborating? And then the question is, does that front-end team will also become a little bit of full stack and touch that service as well? If that's the answer, yes, for sure, they should be involved. If that's not the goal, that they will remain pure front-end focus, then likely it will feel for them a waste of time if they would join such a meeting. As a manager and maybe as a product manager as well, you should pay attention to those things. And again, listening to what people are feeling during those processes is important. And then you can go, to this iteration, these retrospective moments where you can learn and feed and adjust as you go. I think it's important that this adjustment happens as you go, right? So it's a matter of finding the way that works well for the team, right? I think there are a few basic principles that you want to keep, right? You should never have one person that is solely responsible for one thing in the system. Yeah. That's just a basic practice. You want that person to be able to go on holidays, to take their days off. And if they get sick, you want to be able to keep up with the project that you're executing. But then, and therefore you want to have, not a single person only, but rather a shared responsibility on a component. And you have several practices that you can do to achieve that. So aiming to have, for example, 2 backend developers, 2 front-end developers, and maybe, as you're pointing out, 1 or 2 data people in the team, that might be a few good principles for you to keep on. That's not always possible though, right? Yeah. So I understand that sometimes you are going to have a team that has only 1 data engineer, for example, and then you need to find out different ways to share knowledge across different teams, right? So imagine you have one team that has 1 data engineer here, and team B that has another data engineer. What are the things that you can do to share knowledge between them, right? So Spotify has this model where they have the squads and the chapters, and maybe the chapter is a place where people can keep sharing their knowledge, so that things there are no gaps when people need to have adjustments, right? Because during their personal life, they might leave the company, or maybe they might need to go on a sick leave for unfortunate situations. And there should be a way for the company to keep the knowledge in place so they can continue implementing the roadmap initiatives. Yeah. There's, of course, a place where this happens across teams, and then there's a place where this happens within the team. So if there's one backender that is interested in data engineering, that might be the second person on the data side, right? If there's a front-end developer that's more interested in the back-end, that might be the place where back-end and front-end, you have more of a full-stack developer that is peering together with the back-end developer to share knowledge within the team, right? So I think that's usually preferred. So if you can keep that knowledge within the team, that's nice because they are very much involved into the daily job of what they're executing. If that is not possible, then you need to think of the connection across the teams.
Yeah, interesting. I recently had a conversation with a colleague, and he always advocates when it comes to personal development, kind of stepping away from this T-shaped profile that you probably have heard of, and moving more towards pie-shaped profile when it comes to personal development. And he then focuses on back-end as well as infrastructure. He says when it comes to then this multidisciplinary team, if you have a team of pie-shaped people, then that's like a force to be reckoned with, because probably you have overlap. You don't need to have duplicates in people, because people have kind of this depth in not just one topic, but two specific topics, and probably not equally as deep as kind of your peers, but to a certain degree that you can have the confidence in a team basically to execute. I think that's very powerful. Like looking at, okay, what do I like and what is kind of adjacent to it? Back-end and front-end seems like a good fit. Back-end and infrastructure, or data and infrastructure, and then data and back-end. Front-end UX and research specifically, and UI. Like people are becoming more broader. And I think now, especially with AI and kind of this increased capability of gaining knowledge, you can definitely work towards depth in a lot of fields. Now, the problem is still tech is very wide. And when it comes to product development, there's so much you can learn. You still would have to focus and specify and be like, no, I want to contain myself to these verticals, and then that's it.
Correct. I think it's a matter of focus, right? So I have gone through companies that did this change of a person that is a backend developer into. I have gone through different things, right? So in the past, everybody was a full stack developer. I have that impression, at least, or I should say, like 20 years ago, that was the landscape. There was not clear split between front end and back end. I think later in time, we started having these specializations between back end and front end. And I notice nowadays that people are moving towards more of a pie-shaped kind of professional. And I agree with you. And I think finding, again, the balance, right? Having people to be full-stack developers, so going from the design to front-end to back-end to infrastructure and down into networking and computing hardware, that's with the scope of the tech nowadays, it's quite rare to find professionals like that, right? So, and professionals would need to have years and years of experience to fulfill those roles, right? On the other hand, having people only focus on one discipline creates these gaps, right? Where you really need to have big teams so you can have all areas covered. So I really like what you were saying. So having people that maintain focus on one discipline and they go a little bit across the board on the discipline adjacent to what they do, I think that's where you can find the nice balance between having the knowledge to maintain and do the things you are expert on, and to support other areas so you can collaborate together with other teams, right? If you know a little bit of what the other team member is doing, that's also very valuable for feedback, right? Mm-hmm. People will do their best job in isolation, but it's often extremely important for you to get review feedback from other team members. So if you're the unique backend developer in your team, you're at the big risk of your own blind spots and biases, right? So you're developing your code, you can send a merge request to another colleague, and he might say, yeah, from what I see, that's good. But if he has a little bit of more competency to do a critical review to give you feedback, you can reduce together a bunch of biases during the development as well. It's similar to that old principle of like, if you develop a feature, you share that with someone else to test it, right? If you don't have a QA team, right? You just like, you need to have another developer testing, because when you're developing and testing your own software, you're directly at risk to go through your own biases and have very obvious mistakes done that will be quickly captured by the user. One way to prevent that, give it to someone else and just let them test what you have done, right? So I really like this idea and this approach of having the competencies a little bit shared between team members.
Yeah. For me, it's also like a means to an end with regards to team size then, because if you don't have that, your team grows in people. And with big teams, you get like a lot of people problems.
Yeah,
like
coordination, right?
Coordination, alignment, discussions. You mentioned that indeed. You have teams within teams that then engage probably within their own circles, but there's not a lot of overlap. And then if you have a discussion, especially from a product sense, like I've been thinking about this, do I involve then the whole team? Or do I involve people that are interested? But I do think everyone needs to have kind of this broad knowledge of the domain, but not everyone needs to go deep. So then when do I involve them? Is that very early on when things are like super vague? Or is that too early? Because I've also gotten feedback like, yeah, it wasn't really that valuable. So it's very difficult when team size grows, when to involve them from a product sense. And then also when it comes to effectiveness, like I don't know what the right team size would be then.
Yeah, that's lovely. You're following through the topics I had in mind by naturally. So thanks for that. Again, roadmap. Team domains, right? So application domains. Third, stakeholders. Fourth, team size, right? So if you are thinking of reshaping the teams in your organization, there's some research, right? There's the lovely book called Team Topologies that talks a lot about team settings. And the ideal team size will sit between 3 people and 9 people, right? So 6 and 9 might be a bit of more sensible team setting, but more than that, you go into a lot of coordination that you need to do, and it becomes every meeting you have is very expensive, right? Because you get everybody in a room, and every meeting becomes really expensive in that way. So you should be thinking about those numbers, right? There's lovely reading that you can do during in team topologies, but they talk about one interesting fact is the Dunbar number, right? That talks about how much trust relationship you can keep between people in different levels, right? So and the numbers tell around that you can keep trustworthy relationships, close relationship where you were really aligned with the person with around other 5 people. So that's a general estimate of human interactions, right? So people that you can deeply trust and connect to, like your family members and you know your close relatives. Then there's another moment where like we're talking about 10 people where you can still trust not as deeply as these 5 people, but like you can still develop some quite trust relationship and connection with these people. There's another moment where that breaks, which is around 50. So that goes into a different level. You can remember still the name of everybody, right? When you're talking about 50 people, you can reckon them by first name and say, hey, I know your name. I know in which department you work on and which team you work on. And then you go to another number of 150, where you vaguely, know names of people and you vaguely remember where they work on, but you reckon them by face. I know this person works in my department, so you have different levels which play a role in the way that you also set up organizations, right? So if you want to create this deep connection where people can be high performance, can count on each other, and it's easy to go through processing new requirements and changes in the software because you just share so much of your, principles and values with this person that whatever the decision they make are very much aligned to the decisions you would make yourself, and you kind of just complement each other into the differences, different perspectives you have. That is the type of way of working you want to get into these teams, right? So you want to keep the teams with that sizing, right? Between 5 and 9 people size. Involving people at the right moment, I have heard that from so many product managers, right? So and from both sides, right? From product managers and developers. developers often are either complaining that you involved me too early, and that's completely out of my focus, or complaining about why did it involve me earlier in the process, right? And I don't have a specific formula for that, but I noticed that sometimes sharing different levels of information at different points is what is the request the developers have, right? So knowing that something is upcoming and that the general idea is this, and that what is expected from them now is X, Y, and Z, maybe that's the type of information they want to have at the beginning, right? So, hey, we are thinking in this direction. At the moment, I don't expect you to do anything, but if you think this direction doesn't make sense, please let me know. Or if you have opinions, strong opinions about it, please let me know.
Yeah.
So when you have this type of communication at the beginning, people at least have this sense of being involved and have the chance to contribute if they feel like they should be contributing at that moment, right? As you evolve close to the project, and then you go deep into, okay, we're getting ready to start developing that or thinking about it, the technical aspects, then people want to be more involved, right? But I think the level of information that is shared at different moments is where I think product managers can do their beautiful game of presenting the information at the right time, right? Which is, I can honestly say, super challenging, of course, because I think along together with other project managers about that too. And what I observe is that when you have engineering managers and product managers that can work together well, you see that happening, right? Then they can think together. So product manager comes to engineering manager, hey, we're going to be working on this project. Do you think it's a good moment to involve the team? Boom. Then the engineering manager, well, the team is focused on X, Y, and Z, and they are not really, they're concerned about these other problems. So when there is this interaction, they can find out together and talk with the team, right? And again, learning, right? So if in one moment you got to involve people too early, and in the second moment you involved them too late, adjust, right? And try to find contracts together with the team. I think that's the power of having stable teams. You can learn and evolve together as a group of people, right?
Yeah. What I used to do is mainly based on my own experience. I was like, I wanted to be involved early. So then when we would kind of kick off a new milestone with regards to research and design, I would have everyone there, stakeholders and engineering team. And then I got feedback that for some engineers, like it was too early. So then I decided also time-wise, like involving everyone, like you mentioned, if you have a big team, it's expensive. So I did the opposite. Then I didn't really involve them very early on. And I tried to kind of cross that bridge by communication and kind of focusing on the why and outcomes and so on and so forth. But as an individual, from a product sense, I noticed I'm becoming a bottleneck because, first of all, I can't answer everything. Like still, I don't have all the knowledge. So then I would have to go back and forth between tech and stakeholders, which is also not ideal. And I also don't want to have people not feel like they have an option to kind of collaborate and contribute. So now I ask, I'm like, this is kind of the focus. This is why we do this, provide clarity on kind of the outcome we try and achieve. And then we kick off and I'm like, who wants to be involved? And people step up. And I've noticed the same people step up, which is not a bad thing. But those people want to be involved broader than just the technical side, want to understand more of the domain. And I see it's paying dividends because from conversation to conversation, they remember specific nuances, probably related to what they're responsible for on the tech side. And they challenge certain assumptions that they have or also solution directions. And I really enjoy this kind of way of working now. I think I'm going to stick with that, where I'm just going to give people the option to contribute and to collaborate early on. And they can decide, okay, this is valuable for me or this is not really valuable for me. And I can challenge, okay, do you want to be involved in every conversation or more on this side? And people actually take accountability and ownership of that as well, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, fantastic. I think it's interesting to observe how when you get this involvement, at least in my experience, what I notice is also inspire other developers as well, right? So you get these people that are wanting to be involved early on, but you can get other people that are actually inspired by that, right? So they get really curious about what's going on the business side and get more involved into what are the customer needs and the user needs, right? We're talking about a certain setup, and I'm just guessing now of a setup of a very big company, right? Where sometimes you have a few layers between your user and your end user and customers that go through, stakeholders, project managers, or product managers, and then it lands into the developers. But I think the closer you can get to the end users and to the customers, the more you can help the team to develop a customer-centric mindset, right? So what are the risks of having so many layers? And I think you might know well, is that you in incurring the many assumptions and translations that happen between what the customer is expecting or the end user expecting. Through these different layers, you might lose the feedback loop, right? That you could have directly talking to the end user and experiencing and evolving such features together with the user. And involving the developers early on, I think for me means getting them closer to the user and to the customer needs, right? A few experimentations that can happen there, and which are very interesting. And I've been trying out recently is design thinking principles, right? So trying to think from the customer's shoes, really thinking of like what are the problems the customer faces in the daily life of what your business domain is, right? Or your solution space is, right? So if you put yourself in the shoes of the customer and think of, I want to I have this challenge and I want to solve that. And you get a group of people that is multidisciplinary to think about that. You create so much empathy, right? And that empathy is powerful for people to, for several reasons. One of them is to understand what customer needs they are fulfilling, to improve the quality of what the outcome will be, and also to challenge each other, right? So if one of the people there say, "Hey, I think this is the solution for the problem," the other one saying, "Yeah, but I don't think this really solves the problem of the user," those are really powerful conversations to be had, right? And I think the third aspect is quality in itself, right? You see your user using what you deliver. You want to be proud of what they are using and what you are delivering, right? So I think the quality becomes just a natural aspect of what you want to deliver as a developer, as a product and engineering team, because you feel that what you are delivering has value for real people in the end that will be happy or not with the product they are using, that will have their problem solved or not, that will have an intuitive interface or not, that will be something to be proud of or not, right?
It's such a fulfilling feeling.
Yeah.
Like that's the best, to be honest.
Exactly.
You were discussing Dunbar's number, and I was thinking back to kind of my previous experience with regards to teaming and reteaming. My only experience has been very early on. Like now as a consultant, I go in and out of teams, so I don't really have that much impact on organizational changes. But back then, it was probably my first year as a developer, more towards the end of that. And then management decided we're going to reteam. And I didn't really understand kind of what problem we're solving or what team we're going to. But especially if you have a bigger organization where indeed for 150 people, you don't really know the people, like you don't have the capability to form those connections then basically, yet you are responsible for organizational structure, delivery with regards to productivity and fulfillment, with regards to KPIs and the deadlines that we have, or at least the delivery roadmap for the company. Because I even think people that make those decisions everyone does it with the best of the company's interest at heart. That's a strong feeling that I have, and it will stay that way until I feel otherwise by building a relationship with someone and learning that. But otherwise, if everyone decides kind of with the best at heart, if you are responsible for that big number of people, you can't build those relationships. So then you look at other aspects. And if that buy-in is not necessarily there, that's what I had in my experience. I just feel like a number or a responsibility from a technical side, and then you get placed in a team as an ex-developer. And then that's that. Like I feel like the buy-in for teams to be actually owning what they have and fulfilling kind of that process of becoming a team is super important when a reorganization happens that way.
100%. Yeah. It's I think the most important aspect actually, right? So because it costs a lot to do a team change like that, right? So You invest both management time to think about it, to guide people, to communicate, to make sure this happens in a successful way. You get people that might have already a stable relationship with their peers and are used to the domain they're working on, lowering their performance, and actually there's a ramp up that should happen again after the team has changed. So they will find their own way of working, get used to their own, ceremonies or communication style, and get used to each other. So definitely there is an important cost there. So when you are doing such a team change, it's important that you get the buy-in of the team members, because then you get these processes going through in a much healthier and quicker way, right? So change by itself is something that happens, right? I think accepting change is the best way. But then there is another thing, which is embracing change. If you can embrace the change, then you see the change from a positive aspect, and you can take it as a learning opportunity, as an opportunity to get to know new people, to own a new domain, to take responsibility, and to get things into a better shape, right? So that's why the buy-in is so important. When you were talking about the transformation of like such a big structure, I think one of the challenging aspects is to really understand the technical aspect. So and often you have these let's say this gap between what the management team knows and what the technical team knows about how the software state is, right? So if you can gather technical input from the team on like, hey, this is our software architecture right now, so as is, and this is where we want to go in terms of dividing modules of our application, or cleaning up maybe technical depths of the past, and making sure we have a nice, clean solution that it can evolve into the needs that the business have. If you have that input together with the thinking on the team side, I think that's one of the important aspects. By doing that, we also get the input from the technical team, right? And of course, with 150 people, you cannot do this with everybody, right? But you need to go through with a few key people with it that have experience in different parts of the software that can give you input about that. I think the other aspect is being transparent, right? So being super transparent when communicating these changes on why you were doing that. What are the things you have considered about it? Helping people to elaborate on the consequences, and also going through that on, okay, once we have changed, what are the channels that they can keep inputting, giving signals to their management team so they can adjust on the small areas that might be blind spots in the way that we have defined the new teams, for example. So those are things that you need to go through in my point of view, to get the buy-in of the team, and especially transparency, right? So in one of the reorgs that we have gone through, I have actually written together with the leadership team a 9 pages document saying, hey, we were here, we are coming from this situation of team structure, we are observing these problems, this is the new structure that we are proposing because X, Y, and Z, and we are observing these consequences. So we expect to gain this and this and that benefit from this new team structure, and we're going to do in this and that way. So writing down a document or being very transparent to the team to say, this is what we are aiming at, and these are the problems we're trying to solve, I think automatically gets people to at least at the first level of awareness and understanding of what's happening in the teams. And then you need to continue moving on into helping them elaborating the consequences and helping them, feeling engaged into the process as well. And those are definitely big challenges. I cannot make them less than what they are.
Yeah. It's interesting how you described it. Made me think, like, you can see a team as kind of the outcome of your product, basically. and how you communicate. If you involve people early or if you involve them too late, like you might lose them in that aspect. And also with regards to how things are performing, then those metrics that you use as input to do another iteration of improvements, like it's very much like a product, I would say. You make a change, you don't know what's going to happen. I hope you can kind of do an experiment and fail fast as well and learn from that and then decide before you do a massive rollout. It's just the only thing that's different is these are people and the kind of their processes and way of working. Like it's way more nuanced.
That's it. If you involve people too early in such a process, you might actually create too many rumors and fear, actually, right? So if you're starting to think that we actually need to change teams, and you just get to start talking to people, hey, what do you think we should change teams or not? And you do that too early, you might actually just create people to go into fear mode of like, okay, what's going on? Is the company going through a big reorg? Or and that might actually be counterproductive, right? If you involve them too early, you get the feelings you just described before. I'm just a number. People don't care about how do I feel in the organization or what is my contribution to what we're doing. So that's it's definitely similar in that regard, that you need to find the sweet spot there to get people involved. One of the mistakes that I, looking back into my own experience, I think I can share as a learning opportunity for others that are listening is communication is not a one-time thing. So I mentioned to you, I wrote this 8-9 page document explaining why and so on. And we had a second moment where we had a big meeting with the people to communicate what we were going through, why the changes was happening and so on. But one thing I noticed is during the upcoming period, right, a few weeks after that, or maybe even a few 2 or 3 months after that, there were still questions from different stakeholders, from different team members to say, hey, okay, I understand I changed it into a new team. What is the scope and responsibility? So I understand we take care of this and this part, but this component is actually a shared component that all teams need. Then how do we handle that, right? Or maybe stakeholders, okay, I understand, but so before I used to go to this team to ask when there was a bug on this part of the software, did go to this team, and now I need to go to that one. But then the other component that for me is very similar need to go to a different team. What's going on? So the communication is not, I think, should be seen not as a one-time communication, but rather something that you need to repeat a lot. So it's not something that you can do and say, hey, there is a document that explains, I have done my presentation and meeting, people ask questions, I'm done. No, it's something that you need to, elaborate together with people and go through the process together with them. So it is, it really materializes this new vision that you create for your product or your teams, right? I think that's a key learning lesson that we can take, that I could take out of my previous experience.
Yeah, I see that from my own experience, like being on the receiving end of communication, you know instantly when things are either not clear or when you want more communication. When you're the person that's like preparing everyone, kind of educating others and communicating, it's very hard to see what everyone's kind of information diet is or what their needs are. Like patience as the person that is orchestrating and having that ability for empathy are like so crucial, because if you don't have patience, someone comes up with a question, you're gonna be like, well, I explained it 5 times or it's in a doc, you're gonna lose it basically.
Correct.
You have to have patience to actually accommodate for people's feelings. And it is kind of people management, because in the end, you're changing the processes, you're changing the habits. People don't really love change in general. So for them to be able to embrace change, there needs to be that person that is them educating whatever they need, whatever question they have, and they need to feel heard, basically.
Correct. And I think the biggest challenge for people that are in a leadership position is they have all the information, right? So you can go through this process of thinking about team changes with a leadership group for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. So you have been talking about that for a long time.
Yeah.
So everything could be super clear on your head. And then suddenly you were dealing with 30, 50, 150 people that are onboarded in that. And I think you often underestimate the amount of time it takes for people to really understand what is the new picture that you already have clear for 3 months on your head. So I think that's something that you need you never should underestimate, right? Going through that process together with people, giving time, having many conversations about it so people can ask all kinds of questions and really get a clear picture of why this is happening and what is the new outcome, what are the consequences, and where is their place to influence that too. I think that's super important as well, where people feel like their voice can be heard, and that will be taken into consideration for whatever new adaptations that need to be done.
Yeah, I agree. I've really enjoyed this conversation, André. This was a real blast. I love hearing about your perspectives and kind of your experiences next to the theoretical knowledge that you have, and bouncing off my own ideas and experience off of that. I'm definitely going to re-listen to this. I think this was fun.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I love that too. It was very natural, man. Thank you.
Thank you. For people that don't know yet, André was actually on, I think 3.5 years ago, very, very early. We talked about software architecture. So if you like this episode, go check that one out. And otherwise, we'll see you on the next one.